Cool. So, like John said, my name is Ben. I've been coming to River Heights about 7 years now. That's a long time, right? I think last month marked 7 years. 10 years I'll have been in Minnesota in Labor Day. So until then, I grew up in Illinois. I'm a Bears fan. I'm sorry. I'll just apologize that up front. My wife said I couldn't wear my Walter Payton jersey today. So, because apparently you're not supposed to upset your crowd when you walk on stage. So anyway, I'm married to Lauren Catlin, who's hiding back there. Wave your hand. That's my wife. And my mom's sitting next to her, actually, too, Donna. And, I help out with Seek. I've, like John said, I've been through some leadership stuff here. I like to pray for people on Sundays, so you'll see me around. Today, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about one of my passions that has been like a thing I've been doing for a while now, which is chasing after my best life ever. And so what I want to do is walk you through a little bit of a history of how I started chasing this and what my path has been. And I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and as all good nerds go through a phase where there's some seminal point where they get connected with comic books. And, mine was the death of Superman. That was a big deal. It brought a lot of people into comic books. And that got me into other comics like Frank Miller's The Dark Knight, which is the comic books that sort of are the 1980s and 90s Batman movies are based on. And so I got really into like fantasy and superheroes and things like that. It was also, and when I was in high school, the time when the dot-com bubble started to get big, right? And Bill Gates was worth like a bajillion dollars or something, I think. It turns out, I heard yesterday, he's still the richest man in the world. Which, oh my God, he did that with Microsoft Windows. But anyway, so you'll notice the fruit. Anyway, so like it was during that time also that my family, I have a great family, but they didn't make a lot of money. They've never made a lot of money. And so I kind of looked at that and I said, I want a cool life, but my parents aren't like awesome, like not like, Batman. And they're not rich like Bill Gates. And so I started coming up with a life plan that would go something about like this. I would go to school and learn how to make awesome stuff. That's a TARDIS, which is a time machine that's bigger on the inside, if you're wondering. And so then I was like, okay, then I'll invent something awesome. Then I'll make like a bajillion dollars doing that. And what I'll do is I'll end up awesome like Bill Gates and rich. Or I'll end up like Nikola Tesla. At the very least, if I'm like poor, I'll at least have made all the most awesome inventions ever. And then if I'm lucky, I'll do all those things and learn Kung Fu, and I'll be Batman. And so I thought, okay, this is an excellent plan. Let's go do this. So I went to a technology school. And it turns out when you go to engineering school, you meet engineers' kids, because not everybody who's a pastor's kid goes to school. Usually it's like engineers' kids go to engineering schools. And what they tell you is, yeah, my parents make good money as engineers, but not like Bill Gates money, right? Because it turns out there's exactly one Bill Gates and one Batman, and you ain't them. And so I was like, oh, okay, well, maybe at the very least I can pick out some threads of like how they became awesome. And I started looking into their lives and digging. And I found a common theme, and it works like this. You get born. You get older and learn stuff. Something friggin' magic happens, and you become awesome. That was, it's at that point I got depressed. Because I'm like, friggin' magic, right? And, I'm just going to sit on that for a moment, because Pete told me I had to. But, I think that's really true for a lot of us, right? We've come to the world with expectations, and then the world has told us, like, there is only one Bill Gates, and you aren't them. And it kind of smashes our expectations, and that makes you depressed. Has anybody else been like that? Anybody besides me been there? Yeah? Okay. All right. So, I took a semester off. I did an internship. I came back. I went to church. I said, okay, maybe school's not the right place to find your best life ever. Try church. And when I got to church, I met these people, and they were awesome in a different way. They weren't rich. They weren't powerful. Some of them could have been rich and decided not to. But what they did have was they had a certain kind of competence and a certain kind of agency in their life where they could make things happen in their own life. Life didn't happen to them. And I started thinking, that looks attractive, and that's a lot like what Batman does, without the crime fighting. And I want that. And so I started questioning, maybe I've been going about this all wrong. Like I've had a what is the best life picture in my head, but and I've been trying to answer the how. But maybe I need to go back and revisit the what is your best life ever question. And so I did that. I said, what are the qualities of a best life ever? And I looked at my friends and I came up with 5 answers. It is bigger than just you. I believe this is a quality of the best life ever because it touches on something that is both outside yourself and deep inside of you. I believe that every person in this room believes that there is something you want, something that is put inside of you that is bigger than yourself, and you're almost afraid of it. There's a term that a church I really love made up for this. It's called the Big, Hairy, Audacious Goals, which you can shorten to BHAG, which I think is a funny acronym. And so this is something inside of you that God put in there that needs to come out, but like you feel smashed by the world's expectations, and so often we're afraid to talk about it. We're afraid to dive into this. But the people I saw who had the best life ever, they had started to connect to that bigger part. Secondarily, your legacy outlasts you. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this because I think it's pretty true that most people, when you're gone, you want someone to remember that you were here. And so I put some of my heroes on here. And then I put some pictures of like working with kids. Like I want my kid to remember my life well. And the kids in this church as we work with them. It has drastically more joy than anger and cynicism. So I got lucky and both these people were in the first service. This is actually a picture taken at church. So I think these people, I love them. They're mentors to me, both of these people. I've connected with them in the past, Tom and Barbara. And their lives are full of joy. They exemplify this. This picture exemplifies this. This is what I want my church to be, a place full of joy, a place where people are laughing all the time. And I want puppies. And so what I don't want is anger that makes my mouth move faster than my brain, right? And the people I know that are cynical and angry are not living great lives. Most of them aren't happy with their lives. And so I think the counter-positive must be true. If you're going to have a great life, it's probably full of joy and not anger and cynicism. All right, it gets better as it goes. I have a chart here on the right because I'm an engineer and I like charts. And what this shows is like, when I say this, I'm saying your life's going to generally go upwards. Like you're not going to like avoid having down times. Like life is full of down times. That is unavoidable. But you want the lowers to not hit you as hard and you want the highs to be higher every time, right? And so that's what I believe part of the best life is. And again, just using, my infallible Boolean logic, this lower left corner, it says, ever since I started working, every day has been worse than the one before. That means each time you see me, this is the worst day of my life. This seems like the opposite of awesome. So I said that it must get better if it's not getting worse in order for me to have the best life ever. Also, wine gets better when it gets older in the Giving Trees a Red book. All right. So bad stuff doesn't derail you. I got my first F in college. That was kind of a blow to me, so I put that up there. I actually got 2. 9/11 was a big blow to me. I don't know if it was to you, but I was in college at the time. It was very difficult. And what I saw at this church was people that took these things and they learned from them and they moved on and their lives progressed and they knew how to internalize those things correctly, process them, and turn that into a positive energy to move forward, and as opposed to getting stuck. And so to me, that is a quality of the great life. So, it's at this point, I've given you my 5 qualities, and if you're like me, you're asking, hold up, man, like, I want one of those things, and one of them sounds like freaking magic, let alone all 5, right? And so, what I did is I started looking at those same people, and I said, how did they get there? How did they get these qualities? And I came up with what I think is a process, and it works like this. Friggin' magic is you hear God, you try stuff, you evaluate, and you do it all over again. This cycle is the cycle of awesoming. And, this is really what it's about, right? Like, we want those 5 things. We come here, we hear God, we try stuff, we evaluate. And in order to learn how to do that well, each of those 3 points, and come back to repeat it over and over, I looked to the Bible. And after an exhaustive 20-minute Google search, I decided that the character that best lives this out and exemplifies all of this in the Bible is Jesus. My wife has assured me that this is cheating to pick Jesus as your favorite character. But I will get to why I believe that is not true in a moment. But first, let's talk about how Jesus is awesome. He had an awesome life. Just period, the dude had an awesome life. Like, healed the sick. That's awesome. Raised dead people. I want to raise dead people. That would be awesome. had groupies. All right? I always like to say Jesus led arguably the best life ever, or the biggest legacy ever, I'm sorry. And this massive legacy was encompassed by a ministry that was full of joy, full of happiness, full of like doing amazing things. And I think his life got better and better and better all through the 33 years, right up until he died. And then it got amazing, right? Because he came back from the dead and did awesome stuff. Like, that is truly cool. And so how he did that was the cycle of awesoming. He prayed a lot. Luke 5:16 says, but Jesus often withdrew to the lonely places and prayed. And he set us up to do the same stuff. I'll hit a verse on this in a second. But he said before he died, like, hey, I'm going to make it so you guys can do this. This is where you say, hold up, Ben. Hold up. I am not Jesus. He was God's son and stuff. And by definition, the man is made out of friggin' magic. I think that our general perception of Jesus goes about like this. We think of him as 50% God and 50% human, right? Isn't that about true? The church would tell you theologically, you are wrong. And this is the actual answer. Jesus is all human, all God, and that should blow your mind. Yeah. Mind blown. My mind's blown. Whenever I think about this, it hurts my head. So this is what I did is I made a chart just to make a point out of this. Jesus was born. He upset his parents. He ate food. He slept. He had friends. He prayed to God for stuff. He disliked jerks and hypocrites. Liked kids. Was tempted. Read the Bible. Got mad sometimes. Wept for joy. Liked parties. And he died. Those are human things. That is a full human life right there. That is exactly what you and I do all the time. And the Bible mentions this stuff, and I think that's important because in a lot of places you don't talk a lot about like what people are eating unless they happen to be starving or something, then and God provided for them supernaturally, then they talk about it. But it's not Instagram, so they don't talk about food a lot. But then we balance that with this 100% God stuff, right? So Lauren says I confused God and Batman. I don't see it. So first off, his birth was announced by angels. All right, I totally wish that would have happened. Mom, did that happen? No. Dang it. All right, so that's probably not going to happen to you. He resurrected from the dead, presumably by himself. What's important there is that Jesus, in his ministry and in various points of the Bible, they pray for dead people and they get better. That's God working through them to do a thing. Presumably, Jesus, being 100% God, resurrected himself. That's the difference there. He floated to heaven on a cloud. That is totally rad. That happened to 3 people total ever in the Bible, and Jesus was the biggest, coolest one. And when he died, it had an eternal impact on how we relate to God. And that's what's important here is that as we go into this cycle of awesoming, we have to remember that what his action was as God was to unlock our ability to hear God. Before that time in the Bible, it was a chosen few people that got to hear God and do stuff with God. And Jesus broke that so we can all do it. All right. So he can be our model, and it is not cheating to pick him, because the stuff he did as God is not part of having the best life ever. Like rising on a cloud is not part of life getting better and better and better all the time, right? His human life was awesome. Like he had awesome stuff like going on all the time with people, all the time. This is relational. It was great. And that's because he listened to God and did what he heard God telling him to do, even when it was really, really hard. And because his expectations, coming back to like having your expectations shattered, his expectations were set by God. Therefore, God always met them because he listened to what God said. Also, every other story in the Bible is pointing to Jesus. You think of this as like a Shakespearean play, right? Where like the third act is actually the climax, and the whole Old Testament points to the third act, and then the decline in Acts 4 and 5 all point back towards that third act. And so that's the important thing to remember is that like every part of the Bible is talking about how Jesus models the best way to relate to God for us. And he said we can do everything he did. And so he says this. This is in John 14:12 through 14. Truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing, and they will do even greater things than these, because I am going to the Father. and I will do whatever you ask in my name, so that the Father will be glorified in the Son. And you may ask me for anything in my name, and I will do it. All right. So, with Jesus set up as our model, here's my advice on how to go about doing the cycle of awesoming. First, the cycle of awesome is training. Know that. Because if you want to be like Jesus, then you have to train. All right, so the first step we talked about, hearing God. One of the ways I hear God the most is when I pray for other people, or I just listen and I ask God to talk to me about me. Different people are different. We're going to go through some other ways you can hear God. But for me, I was talking to my brother this week, and he said, boy, that is just really hard for me. And that has been my experience too. It's really hard for me. And so this cycle of awesoming is how I got better at it. But what I've picked out for me personally is that particularly God's voice is often like an other, right? Like I'm going this way with my mental thoughts, and I say, hey, God, could you tell me about what you're doing here? And some shot of a thought comes like this. It's sort of against the grain or not exactly in line. So for me, that's one of the big ways that I hear God. A lot of people in the building, though, they get these kind of images and pictures about God, and they have these really cool stories where people will say stuff like, oh, I got this picture and it's real weird, and then someone will start sobbing, because it was like super meaningful to them. And so personal prayer is an important thing, hearing from right. And then hearing from other people. So like in the situation where you're like, say, getting prayer up front, right? If I'm praying for you, I'm trying to hear God for you, like you start to learn to hear God more by paying attention to like what I'm saying and saying, is that from God or not? It's like a good check for you. So like getting prayer is a great way to do that. You can, on August 30th, come to a class and we will teach you more about that. Particularly, we'll teach you some helpful ways to pray for people. And we'll talk quite a bit more about that particular aspect of praying. I may or may not, I think I'm going to be helping with that class, so it'll be fun. The Bible, a lot of people hear from the Bible. I picked on John in the first service. So like John is a great example of this. When he reads the Bible, things jump off the page kind of at him, and then he says, oh, that's what God's saying to my life right now. That's a very big thing for him, and I know a lot of people in the church, they really get a lot out of the Bible that way. Other examples in the Bible. So when people do things in the Bible, they're in a set place and time, right? And you get a picture, a snapshot of how they're trying to relate to God and their world. And so all the people we've been talking about, these heroes of the faith, they are good examples that you can look at and say, how does my situation like that one? And I found really helpful at certain times I'm reading, like about David or about, different people, and I go, oh, hey, that's a way I could pray, or I could push into God more and get more out of it. So that's another way to hear God. I'm going to highly recommend, if you heard the sermon last week, to not pick up the jawbone of a donkey and try to kill 1,000 Philistines. That just seems like not a good emulating thing to do with characters in the Bible. But, all right. And then I just want to note, like, Jesus spent time and effort doing this, right? So he went out early, often, and prayed by himself. Or he stayed up late and prayed into the night. And so he put a lot of effort into hearing God for every day's ministry and every day of his life. So that's another thing we can do, is push in with effort. All right, so we've heard God. Now we want to try stuff. First thing to trying stuff is reject the lizard brain. And everybody asks, what's the lizard brain? I will tell you. The lizard brain is that part of your brain that says, run away from loud noises. It's that part of your brain that says, if you come up here and speak, somehow people will magically see you naked. And the reality is like, not only is that rejecting, like, do you need to reject that idea, but part of how you can reject it is realize the ridiculousness of it. Not just that, like, somehow I could take my shirt off without realizing it, but more importantly than that, like, if I did, it wouldn't matter. Right? There are no massively negative outcomes to me doing something silly up here. Falling down, tripping over a cord, crying, like, it doesn't matter. What's important is that I'm out there trying stuff, and I'm rejecting that part of my brain that tells me falsely to listen to those kinds of notions. And that is very hard. You have to actually work at that. All right, so you've rejected the lizard brain. You want to start small. Join a small group. Small group is a great place to do training for other bigger things. Small group is a safe place. It's like an obstacle course where you're getting ready for the battlefield. It is the place where you can explore some of this stuff. Small groups are starting in the fall. How you do this in small group is you ask God, while you're during prayer time, your small group should have a prayer time because we're the Vineyard and that's what we do. And when you're there, you say, okay, we're going to pray for somebody, and you aren't the person getting prayed for. You say to yourself in your head, hey, God, what would you like to say for this person right here that we're praying for? And God will say something, or you'll hear something, or you'll have eaten bad guacamole and you'll get an idea, and you'll say it. And what you get to do then is ask them for feedback, like, did that mean anything to you? Well, we'll hit on this just briefly a little bit later, but like, did that matter? Did you get something out of that? Was that important to you? And you know what? That person in that small group, they know you, they like you, they know you're not like way out in left field or anything. They're just gonna, if it's something weird that you said and it doesn't matter to them, they'll just tell you it didn't matter. It's no big deal. And what you can do is start to learn to hear by trying. You will start refining that hearing, that voice, that other that we talked about. From there, you can move on and try harder stuff. Pray in slightly more public settings. Join the prayer team, please. I need more people to pray with me every week. I would love that. I want to desperately pray in pairs every morning for you guys who need prayer. And so we need more people on the prayer team. I would love that. And it is a great opportunity. Like, I will let you shadow with me, and I will make sure that nothing terrible happens. And it won't anyway, just because the lizard brain tells you it will, and it just won't. What I say in the first service, I've never been sued for praying for somebody. So nobody's ever said, you ruined my life, Ben. 10 years I've been doing that now. And that's nobody. Okay, secondarily, make decisions that have consequences. You can start with smaller consequences. That might be like, hey, I think God's telling me to give money to this homeless guy on the side of the street. Or it might be like, I want to tithe. Tithing is giving 10% of your income to the church. It's a practice that the church has done for a really long time. And I feel like you've got to be called to do that. And so it's a risk to give money to the church that you don't, you could be using for other things. There are other small things you can do to step out, get involved a little more, put your energy into things. Go to conferences with like-minded people. Similarly, conferences cost money. You got to get a hotel. You got to pay the conference fee. You got to eat out, unless you pack picnic baskets and stuff. So this has a great thing because you can go there and get prayer and pray for people. And the best thing about a conference is how it helps you learn to hear God is like the faith level is up, right? It's kind of like the water table or the floor, the threshold for experiencing God is much higher. And by that I mean you will more likely experience God because you're in a situation where more people are geared into that and turned into that. It's a great way to start to hear more, get more feedback. Then you can go big. I'm not going to go nuts on this, but you could teach a class on praying for people. I would love for people who have been through the prayer class to come help me teach next 2 weeks from now when we do the prayer class. That would be great. You could plant a church. I actually moved to Minnesota to help start a church, and that church is going quite well now, and we left because God called us away, and we came to River Heights, and we love you guys. You could speak at an event, We will ask you to speak at something if you hang around long enough. That's just part of our culture here. We want to hear your story. And that is scary the first time you do it. Or the second, in my case. So you can become a missionary. That's also kind of difficult, I heard. All right, moving on. So this is the important bit. I've talked a little bit about getting feedback and evaluating. So the big question, the hard question, the not Minnesotan question to answer is, how did you do? When somebody asks you, you say, oh, you did great, you betcha. You got to get actual honest answers, and you have to evaluate. Some of that's going to be on your own. You're gonna say, did the thing you thought God said would happen? So sometimes you pray and you say, I think God's telling me something's going to happen, like an event. And you can measure that. It turns out if it didn't happen, you might not have been hearing God. Did the person you prayed for tell you that what you prayed for resonated with them? Good Lord, I put too many prepositions in that sentence. But what I mean by that is, when you're praying for people, and God's really speaking, it touches their lives deeply. And they react, and they can tell you, this is what's happening to me right now. In fact, if you come to the prayer class, we'll encourage you to ask people, tell me what's going on right now, so you can get this feedback. And I have found that super helpful. did a healing happen? Similarly, if you pray for healing, you can ask people like, did you go to the doctor? Did that thing get cleared up? We don't. There was just recently, my dad had a pretty major heart operation, and we thought it was going to go south, and he pulled through, and we're considering it miraculous. But more than that, even, they showed like 2 weeks ago, they said he's got a blood clot due to complications, from following up on the surgery, and his doctor, his cardiologist, is a man of faith, and he said, Joel, go have your people pray. And the next day when we do the cath to go check out the blood clot, just pray that it's gone. And they were sure. They were sure he was not only going to have like a stent put in, but he was going to have to go back into open heart. And it turns out they went in the next day, completely gone. No problems. They cleared him to go fishing. Yeah. That is a healing. When this happens because doctors tell you it happened. It's a good thing, and you learn how to hear from this. So here's a little bit. So it's important that you are always pushing out. So when you evaluate, one of the questions you want to ask is, am I getting better at this? Is this getting a little less scary? Am I starting to get comfortable? And then the follow-on question is, what do you want me to do next, God, that's scary and outside my reach? So when somebody asks you to preach, you say, oh, yeah, I don't know about that. And then you say, you know what? Is that God calling me to do that? Okay, I'll try. It's hard. I got a day job. I got a kid. I'll take a half day off to preach on a Tuesday to the staff. Yeah, but you do it because it's going to grow you and it's going to expand you. And the things that used to be scary to me are so far in my rearview mirror from 10 years ago. I didn't want to pray for people the first time I stood up there, It turns out when you're in a church plant, there's nobody else to pray for people, so you have to. So, and this is where we come to, is faith is spelled R-I-S-K. This is a vineyard statement. John Wimber kind of coined this, founder of the Vineyard. And he said kind of the point here is like, if you're risking, that's faith. If you could do it on your own, is it really faith? I'm going to leave that where it is, and that's a good thing to measure against as you evaluate. All right, so then we repeat the cycle for our best life ever. This cycle is continuous. You have to keep doing it, and what you do is you start a flywheel of awesome. This is the training. This is the training that makes everything easier than the last time you did it. It helps you get going. It helps you move and with what God's doing. Jesus is our best example in a long line of examples. We're going to talk about Hebrews 12 tomorrow, and I think it's 12 or 11, and there's a big list of the heroes of the faith, basically, and we preached on several of them. And they spend about a paragraph on each one, and they say, these people had faith, and these people had faith, and these people had faith, and it culminates in Jesus. And that's because Jesus heard God, he tried stuff, and he moved on and evaluated. There's several times where he says, Jesus was so happy with the outcome of him hearing God and telling people to do stuff or doing stuff that he wept. Remember that this is a process and it takes time to get an effort to get good at it. I have heroes in each church I've been to that are not Bill Gates and Batman. These heroes are people that sometimes I can put up on a pedestal. They're so much better than me at this. I'm never going to be that good. Well, if you want to get better, you listen to what God says, you try stuff, you evaluate, and you do it again, because that's what they did. I've sat with some of these heroes, and I've sat with some of these people. John is one of my heroes, for example. And I've just picked his brain, like, how'd you get good at this? This is how he got good at it. And your effort increases the effectiveness of the process. Like we talked about a flywheel. At the beginning, you're going to put a lot of effort in to make a little bit, but you keep putting a little more effort in, a little more effort in, a little more effort in, and it's going to go better and better and better. Repeating this is also about leaning out and trusting God. You can't do the things God's going to ask you to do on your own. So you're going to have to trust, and you're going to have to learn from him. All right. I would like the band to come back up. So, in conclusion, getting your best life ever is all about this cycle of awesoming that Jesus modeled for us. What you're going to find is that relating to God is literally about connecting to something outside yourself. I mean, just by definition, God is bigger than you. But more importantly, what you're going to find is that God's going to tap into those goals he placed inside you, the BHAGs, the big, hairy, audacious goals. And he's going to start bringing those out. He's going to start lifting those out and saying, like, do this, and this is going to push you in that direction. Do this, and this is going to push you in that direction. And as you do this, you're going to find out that God's plans for you are relational. They're about connecting to the community. They're about connecting to the world around you and the people around you. And that's going to create a legacy. People are going to remember you when you're gone. They're going to say to you, like, I really appreciate it when you did this thing for me. I'm going to remember that. There are people who have moved on in this church, passed on, and have died, and I remember them. I remember the good things they did. I remember the bad things they did too, but I remember the overall what God was doing in their lives and what they did. Listening to God is what allows us to set our expectations based on what he's saying. This is where we stop setting our expectations that we are somehow going to be Bill Gates or Batman. And you start setting your expectations based on what God has for your life, which is calling out those deep things he put in you. And that is going to create more joy in your life. Cynicism and anger, those come from hurt expectations. They often say happiness equals reality minus expectations. And God has a better reality than you can imagine, and he wants to set your expectations to match. And this is going to kill cynicism as well. And while we're helping us not get stuck after failures and terrible life circumstances, because when we're angry, when we're cynical, we can't process that stuff. We can't deal with it. And what God wants to do is say, this is how you deal with it. Let me set your expectation for the outcome here. Let me help you get going. And these things are going to help you make your life better and better as you go. You're going to know that God loves you and cares about you, and you're going to have your expectations matching. And as you look back, you're going to say, this is better. Yesterday was better than today. Tomorrow might be better too. Or even if it's worse, I can handle it. And that makes it better. And so with that, I'd like to pray for us. Well, Holy Spirit, I just pray that right now you would come. Pray that you would fill this room with your joy. Pray that you would come and set our expectations, Lord. Help us know what you want for our lives and how to tap into that happiness of hearing your voice. Amen. Hey, we're going to be doing some ministry time up here. I'd love it if the ministry team could come up for people, and anybody who wants to join me praying for people that has been through the prayer class before. A couple of quick things is, if you're having a hard time with cynicism, if you're having a hard time dealing with whatever you're dealing with, and you feel like, I'm not getting my best life ever, let's come up and pray for us. Any of those 5 things, we'd love to pray for you. And if any of your expectations feel broken, I'd really love to pray for you.
Okay, let's stand.